Good day. This is Charles Denham, Chairman of TMIT, and it's wonderful to have all of you join us today for our webinar. We have a terrific speaker, Dr. Perry Bechtel, who is a former Blue Angel flight surgeon, who's going to share with us, I think, some very topical content. And we also are going to be undertaking a poll. There was so much interest in our recent webinars on healthcare-associated infections, especially as we are broadening and expanding networks and adopting innovations, that we have a poll that we'll be undertaking at the end. My job is, at the beginning, is just to remind all of you to go to your lower left-hand corner of your screen and make sure that your audio is full up, and go to www.safetyleaders.org if you haven't already to download the slides. Which I am on mobile. I'm downloading the latest set right now to my iPad, and then also to make sure that you have an opportunity to read our disclosure page and address our vision and mission, which we have in the preliminary slides that you'll see, and I have Kyle advancing them for me. What we always do is we like to make sure that we're putting patients first and considering them in the focus of our work. And we'd like Jenny Dingman, a longtime patient advocate and supporter, a co-author of the NQF Safe Practices chapter on patients and families, an expert who has been worked with the federal agencies to help them gain understanding of patient advocacy, and also a co-author on multiple papers that are focused on patient-centered care, including disclosure and listening. Jenny, would you start us off today with an inspirational focus on patients and families?
Thank you, Dr. Denham. It's so nice to be here today. Thank you for asking me. I just really want to thank every single person on this webinar for being here today. And thank you so much for your interest and your cooperation in trying to make healthcare safer for patients and families. You've been doing a wonderful job, and just keep up your great work. Today's webinar is very exciting. I can't wait to listen to everything that we're going to hear here today. And again, on behalf of many, many patients and families just like myself and advocates, thank you for being here. I'd like to hand it back to Dr. Denham now.
We may have lost Dr. Denham. This is Frank Gietz. I'm just going to step in, and we will go to the next slide. I know that Chuck is currently at the airport, and quickly to introduce our speakers and panelists. Today we're very fortunate to have Dr. Bechtel, as Chuck had pointed out. He wears multiple hats. He's currently a neuroanesthesiologist at the Mayo Clinic in Florida, and has been involved in a number of activities, including as a patient safety officer and quality leader within his department. And his background is U.S. Naval flight surgeon, where he participated with the Blue Angels as their flight surgeons. He has also done some work with safety coordination around the Space Shuttle alternate sites, as well as the Department of Defense around the manned space flight at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So we look forward to his presentation, and we'll shift and introduce the rest of our panelists after his presentation when we go to the Q&A. So Kyle, if you would forward on, and I will turn it over to Dr. Bechtel.
Okay, well, great. Thanks so much, Frank. I think it's going to be a pretty exciting day, and I'm going to be able to describe some of my journey over the past 20 years or so in medicine, which has included both time in the Navy and my almost entire professional career here at Mayo Clinic for about the past 16, 17 years now. We'll start off with a picture from my backyard, and it's really great here in Florida, although we had a nor'easter last night. But it's one of those places where I can sit and almost anything seems possible. And when you get back, I'm sure as safety leaders that are listening out there, you know, we go to many meetings and events where we talk about our various wins and losses and trying to make things more reliable and safer and higher value for our patients. And it's kind of in this state. And then you get back to work, and this is where I come to work on the photo on the left, which is the front of the hospital at Mayo Clinic in Florida. The center is the Rochester, and the right is Scottsdale. And when I come into work, there's a panel of patients. It's very complex, very sick, high consequence surgery we have to do that day. The staff is so large, the institution so complex. You wonder how, even in my small area, am I going to affect change and make things more reliable for our patients, and really approach some ideals of chasing zero, having zero harm and zero adverse events reach the patient. Over the past couple of years, it's been interesting, coming from an aviation background, to see these new tools of reliability deployed widely, not only at institutions that started them, but now widely throughout the country. I think we're all using some degree of technology to produce redundancy in our systems, be it barcoding, scanning of various types, or computerized order entry and computerized medical records. And there's been a recent surge of interest in checklists, standard operating procedure, which we sometimes call care pathways, and this sort of thing. Verbal readback has been a standard for a long time, and now briefing and debriefing that we're seeing with high consequence procedures of all types. And these new tools of reliability are placed sometimes into an organization with the expectation that there's going to be drastic change immediately overnight. We're going to see automatic drops in our failure rates and our injuries, and many times that just doesn't happen. There's been a recent article about maybe the underperformance of checklists in certain surgical environments. So what we're going to do is have a high-speed, low-drag review of HRO structure today. That's high reliability organizations, attributes, responsibilities of each of the parts of an organization like that. And we're going to detail supporting non-technical behaviors and competencies at the working interface. That's where there's actually nurses, doctors, patient care techs, et cetera, working. If you look at any of the industrial safety literature, they'll talk, when we talk about the bedside, the industrial literature talks about the working interface. I am going to mention the role of training and how crucial training is to producing some of the reliability that we see in some of the best industries. And I'll give some examples that we've had here, both at Mayo Clinic Jacksonville and Mayo Clinic as a whole. I do have one disclosure. I do have a financial relationship with On the Flight Line Productions, otherwise known as the Finer Points of Flying. This is an aviation actually portal where we use new media to present safety topics to pilots, both in the commercial side and private side, and we are expanding to the medical field. As I mentioned, we are using checklists and things of that nature, and what people fail to realize is in commercial flying, we have great safety on the order of 1.6 million deaths per million flights, which is incredible safety record, and that improved tenfold over the past decade. But in the kind of flying I do, which is private pilot flying and non-commercial aviation, even though we use all the tools I just mentioned, checklist, standard operating procedure, briefing, I'm required to have a weather brief before I go flying, the death rate in this environment is about 500 times that of commercial airlines, even though we use the exact same tools that we place into medicine and expect it to have drastic change. So they do improve things, but they have to be put in a greater setting. What we're going to try to do is show you what that setting is. This week in the United States, slightly less than 1 million people will have surgery. 50 people will have surgery on the wrong side or the wrong site. Many of them, the reason they will have that is because they're the wrong patient in the room. That's a very common scenario. The reason they had it on the wrong side is they were the wrong patient. There'll be about 10 surgical fires. Many of these surgical fires will severely injure the patient, and most of them will be for very minor procedures of the head and neck, plastics procedures, and this type of thing. There will absolutely be deaths that are 100% preventable on patients that are on a trajectory to be discharged well. And this is really the current state of our medical system, but I think things are improving, and I think they're improving at a pretty good pace these days. I feel it here, and I'm hoping the other safety leaders feel it as well. Maybe not as quick as we'd like, but I think things are changing. On the flip side, also this week, there'll be about 425,000 commercial flights, about 12.1 million passenger trips, and probably no one is going to die or be seriously injured. And this person on the right, Captain Norris, is a very close friend of mine. She and her husband are both in the aviation industry, and we both barbecue out on the back porch on Sundays and do the exact same things. And there's what I'd like to drive home is in these spectacular organizations that have an incredible record for safety, commercial airlines. Our folks in the aerospace industry have tremendous reliability, nuclear power, utility industries, transportation industries of various types. The oil industry has a tremendous safety record, despite some major accidents that we read about and are highlighted. And the safety that's delivered is delivered by everyday people, like you and I, like the people we interface with and work with every day in our operating rooms, our emergency departments, our chemotherapy units, et cetera. So it's really not the people that are in medicine or the people that are in aviation. It's really the setting that they're placed in helps. And although our organizations may not be ready to take on a 10,000, 100,000 person in HRO organization and become that overnight, in our individual units, in the places we work every day, know the people in them and know the processes, I think we can take individual units and make them highly reliable, highly safe, highly resilient to accident in a much more effective manner. And this, the next part is kind of going to be our journey through that. Both activities are hyper complex. They rely heavily on technology, and I'm talking about aviation v. medicine. They're tightly coupled, meaning problems in one area of the organization where the way the day unfolds can severely affect or backlog things in other areas. They're time sensitive, meaning time is important. For some reason, I feel it sometimes that our surgeons and our physicians that I work with think that we're the only industry on the planet that has a time crunch and has to have patients in the operating room at a certain time, patients out at a certain time, and we're not. All of these HROs are in a time-sensitive environment, but they manage it in quite a different way. And they're very hierarchical at the working interface. In other words, sometimes on a giant plant floor, you might have 1,000 workers on the plant floor and very few managers. In both aviation and in medicine, we have every hierarchy, from very senior people in the organization to very junior, and the interaction between them is important. On an airliner, you might have captain, first officer, you have people working in the cabin. When you come in to bring your plane in, you're going to have people moving baggage, fixing minor things in the furniture, et cetera, and emptying the waste management systems. Each of these people can take down an airliner, and the way the different hierarchies interact with each other, treat each other, and manage each other is very, very important. We see that. We have the same thing in medicine, where we'll have a physician, nurse, patient care tech, et cetera, working in essentially the same environment with people that are have jobs that are just as important, but they're at a lower pay scale or lower level in the organization, and the way we interact is, again, very critical. So what's the difference? Airplanes are not people, doctors are not pilots. The difference of the two systems is reliability, which in its most basic form is the ability to sustain safety over time. This is the chasing zero concept, where we're trying to stretch adverse events perhaps once a week, to once a month, to once a year, to ending them forever. And really, what does it take to not incrementally, but vastly improve the speed with which we improve reliability? And I think that can be done with our teams. Unfortunately, and the bottom part's pretty important because the great interest and the great hope of all kinds of technologies. I'm one of the innovators here, and this is me actually this weekend with my Google Glass on in the operating room. We have some advanced imaging in the background of the image, and we have great technologies for helping us in many, many ways. Pharmacology is incredible. The devices that are coming out now are incredible. none of them will have their potential impact on improvement in lives unless we improve the reliability of the systems we're in. And that's really the fight we're up now. If we want to see these new great advances in devices in pharmacology and oncology that can stretch lives out to 120 years easily, then we really have to chase this reliability issue. I'm not going to go over this in detail. This is actually from a film we did with TMIT with the Blue Angels a couple of years ago. The high reliability organizations have certain characteristics which are in the beginning of every article on HROs: preoccupation with failure, commitment to resilience. But I've highlighted reluctance to simplify, and this is where I see some errors being made in implementation at my end here at Mayo and other organizations. I hear things. None of these organizations ever dumb things down to the point that there's a one-size-fits-all solution. There's typically, they understand they're in a dynamic environment. There's things that are going to happen that they hadn't planned on. There's, in our industry, we may have patients come in, we just couldn't believe they could have this combination of diseases together. And we're in a complex environment, a lot of things going on. And we have to have the courage to allow our highly trained people at the bedside and on the front lines to make decisions and do troubleshooting that's consequential. And all these organizations have people, all the HROs, they realize this, and they do have people on the front lines that are empowered to make the tough call, to make go, no-go decisions that are going to affect the company financially, operationally, and in every other way, but they're the best people to do it. And I just don't know if our industry does enough of that. We certainly don't do enough training to it many times. I come from an aviation background. My dad was a ball turret gunner. These are my three kids, 13, 15, and 17, and they all fly, believe it or not. I have my little 13-year-old there in a 1948 Luscombe. And we talk about layers of resiliency and how to do what we do, which is fairly high consequence, safely all the time. It's part of our lives, and it has been part of my life growing up. As with Chuck, whose dad was a rocket scientist, I'm sure it was part of their everyday discussion and may have driven him to what he's doing now. I don't know. But I was fortunate enough to work down at Johnson Space Center, and I worked with shuttle launch support, worked with an alternate landing site for the space shuttle doing some of the safety work, spent some time with the Blue Angels, and during that time was introduced to many other industries, worked with the chief pilot at American Airlines, worked with the America's Cup folks, NASCAR, IndyCar, CART, the Snowbirds up in Canada, the Thunderbirds down here. I slipped for a minute. And really, we're able to learn from each other what each of these relatively small organizations and some big organizations were doing to improve their safety and to increase the reliability of our procedures. More recently, I was the assistant air boss for the opening ceremonies in the America's Cup, and have done some work with Weather Channel and helping produce the Freaks of Nature series on G-Forces, which aired recently, and I've got a chance to be a stunt double for that, where your own risk is at stake. And each of these organizations and activities spends a great deal of time and training into how they are going to arrange things in a systematic way for reliability. And we'll go over the organization. And then we come back, can we be an HRO? And the answer is absolutely yes. And the America's Cup, Team Oracle, is not as big as any hospital. It's a very small organization. Team Oracle Aviation that I work with occasionally, very small organization, very high reliability. Maybe your chemo unit, your radiology unit, your operating room, relatively small organizationally, but you're able to tackle this. I can tell you that if you put your mind to it, you'll learn enough and apply some principles, you'll be able to do it. Any size and any place. This is a picture I want you to remember. This is our small group when we decided we had to take our interventional radiology, or not interventional radiology, our interventional MRI, our IMRIS unit, which is where we do neurosurgery on a patient using metal instruments, and then at some point during the operation have to bring in a magnet, 3 Tesla magnet on railroad tracks, essentially that are on the ceiling. We bring this into the room, scan the patient to look for residual tumor, then remove it. we know that leaving any instrument during any procedure is a potential fatality for our patients. And we had to come up with a system when we decided this was an important technology for our patients to have, had to come up with a system where we could 100% of the time, for thousands and thousands of cases, never ever do that. And this required a special type of approach towards reliability, a little different than we do in some other areas of the hospital. So we'll take that later. The three levels of organization I think it's important to understand, and they may not all be in place in this way in your hospital, is the enterprise or the organization, the sub-enterprise or the sub-organization. These are really, the sub-enterprise level, the first and second order managers, and then the individual, which is at the working interface. And I like to think of it at these three levels and what has to happen at each to improve your reliability. At the enterprise level, this is the front of our hospital, and you may not have an enterprise that supports all of these areas, but that doesn't matter. I think within your own, if you have agreement within your own groups, you can do an end run around this and make your areas reliable. The enterprise, though, has to set training to excellence as a strategic priority. Very important. At Mayo, we have done that. We have to define a very clear set of behaviors that apply, and these are the words of Tom Krause and Paul O'Neill at various times. These behaviors apply to everyone, whether you clean the floor or you're chief of staff. And these are the way we interact with one another, the way that we behave around one another, the way we approach one another, and the way our departments communicate. You can't have everyone playing by the rules and then one person is allowed to play outside the rules. That just doesn't cut it in any HRO. It certainly didn't cut it at the Blue Angels, no matter who you are. They have to supply talent and resources for robust process improvement. Organizations are very good at this. Hospitals are getting very good at this now, and robust process improvement, it turns out, is becoming a very important part for large and complex organizations to make sure they're achieving reliability. And this is done in the airline industry, utility industry, transportation, Amtrak, and all of the heavy industries. And you have to have realistic budgets for frequent and routine training. I don't know how your hospital is. Ours does not support frequent and routine training in the way that many HROs do. We're getting there. We're realizing the value in it, in training on a weekly basis with our teams. Right now there's about an hour devoted to our entire operating room per week. It's probably about 1/5 of what we need. And I think as the years go on, we're going to have an increased uptake in this type of training. And also, very important for those of you that are at the higher levels of administration, in every HRO, there's humility, great humility actually, at the enterprise level on their role of their contribution to reliability. Each of these organizations, be it Alcoa, International Paper, Amtrak, BP, or any of the airlines, they always attribute the reliability, the safety, the performance of their industry to the frontline worker, to the people on the ground that are connecting the wires, that are running the trains, that are fixing the trains, etc. It's almost a universal attribute of those administrations. They really don't beat their chest too much and take almost every opportunity to celebrate the frontline worker. The middle area, this is the sub-enterprise. These are the first and second order managers. This is Thomas. He's one of our OR supervisors, works on the weekend and at night, and is in charge of the entire operating room after hours. Now, we have an operating room that runs, we're a big transplant center. We run 24/7, 365, multiple rooms all year long. It never stops. And these managers are very important, and from a reliability standpoint, this is really where the special sauce is, if there is one, the special ingredient to making sure that your reliability measures, your safety measures have uptake. The culture of your organization is really created or destroyed, not at the individual level. It's really the first and second order manager level. I say a first order manager is someone who, when you're a surgical tech and they say, hey, you know what, one of our surgical techs is moving, you're going to be in charge of the surgical techs. That's a first order manager. And then maybe the OR supervisor would be a second order manager. But this is where the subculture, the embedded behavior the embedded behaviors are rewarded or not rewarded. And when we try to teach people embedded behaviors, be it universal protocol, hand washing, equipment knowledge, and really rigor with knowing our equipment, this is really where the behaviors are reinforced. If you don't have first and second order managers with leadership skills, you're almost universally going to fail at producing highly reliable settings. And remember, reliability and culture is about behavior and example. It's really not by aspiration. We're going to be the greatest operating room. We're going to be the greatest transplant center. It's about what people do each and every day. That's really what creates the culture and what creates the outcome. It's always behavior. It's never the aspiration of the administrator or the manager. It's the behavior of everybody. Training, training, training. Again, this is an area I think medicine is learning about. We're certainly not very good at it. If you're at a place that has tremendous investment in training from a time standpoint every week, please call me and let me know your model. I would love to see what it is. Training is one of those areas, we know this from the military, that people that are frontline workers get to have leadership experiences. It's only during offline training, not on-the-job training, that the frontline worker gets to be the supervisor for the day, gets to play the role of maybe the manager, and gets to run the organization for a little bit and actually run the training experience. This is where they get their leadership experience, and we know that we see people really come alive when they become a trainer, and we know those are going to be our managers of the future. When someone leaves, we automatically know who's going to step in and take their place, and we have to have that kind of culture. We're trying to develop that here at Mayo. Equipment and procedures, standard operating procedures is developed at this level usually, and it's again, it's critical that the first and second order managers have leadership skills. Their major job, and when disasters occur, be it the Columbia accident, Piper Alpha back in the, I believe it was the 80s, maybe the 70s now, the terrible, terrible oil rig, North Sea oil rig disaster called Piper Alpha, our recent BP Gulf oil spill, almost all of the catastrophic accidents that HROs have to do with mid-level management not reporting unsafe conditions up the chain of command. And you have to put on your second-order managers, no matter how hard it is to tell them things are not safe down here, they have got to have the bravery and the backup to report unsafe conditions up the chain of command. That's absolutely critical at this level. They also, at this level, is where we see what I call line-of-sight problem correction. Often, when there's an issue, either with safety or an operational problem or an efficiency problem, or even a value issue in saving resources, it's these mid-level managers that can work together. And if you get three of them in a room, they can usually come up with the solution that's going to work, and there may be some bartering back and forth. In other words, you check everything on your end, and we'll make sure that we supply the talent for you to do that. The basic problem correction occurs at this level. And the robust process improvement data integrity sometimes gets scrubbed at this level. In other words, when we collect data to see whether we're doing better or worse, it's the first and second order managers that usually have the first crack at seeing the data and sometimes can affect data collection for robust process improvement. It's critical. They're involved in all of this. And then we get down to the individual, and I think we have asked so much of our frontline workers, and we pat them on the back every single day here as much as we can because they're doing so much within their capabilities to affect safety. And I don't know about your hospitals. Ours are very engaged. They really want to become great, and they're willing to do almost anything to achieve that outcome. And I believe there is an I in team. We've been told all our lives there's no I in team, but truly there is. And that is that great teams, we find, are defined by individuals at all ranks within an organization that have excellent behavioral and communication skills. It's almost universal. When you look at great teams and you look at the individuals that are in them, they're really, the reason they make great teams, they interact so well together because they're great individuals that have been trained well. And even some individuals that come into a team, they all of a sudden take on the characteristics of the team and get trained up in the culture of that team. And critically important that we do that. Again, individual workers, if you're a manager, they have to be given the tools and the training and the flexibility to do their job well. And that means they have to be given the time to know their equipment well. And this is sort of an aside, and I know I've said it to Chuck in the past, working in high-tech industries of all types over my life, I've never seen a group that has less equipment discipline and rigor with regard to safety of the equipment than in medicine. And it's not that they don't want to, it's that they're just not given the time to know the normal modes of the equipment, the failure modes of the equipment, all the troubleshooting, all the ways that it's failed in the past that the company knows about that is out there, but they just don't have the time to learn it. Our frontline workers desperately want more time to learn about their equipment, and now we've introduced a program. I can't think of the name of it right now. It's called from expert to master or something like that. That we're trying to get everybody in the OR really expert at using all of their equipment and know all the failure modes, all the things that you would expect an airline pilot, a train operator, or a utility worker to know. We have to allow them flexibility to make decisions and troubleshoot at their level, and not just little decisions about whether to pull one box of sutures or two boxes of sutures. I'm talking about decisions like whether the case should go forward or not go forward. We really have to allow frontline workers to make consequential decisions based on their experience, and it's a critical piece of developing your teams and developing reliability. At the individual level, this is also where the 6 C's of CRM reside. And again, the 6 C's are communication, cooperation, coordination, cognition, understanding their jobs and the other person's job, conflict resolution, critical because of the different hierarchies. Like I mentioned, the working interface has so many hierarchies of individuals. Conflict resolution is very important in maintaining safe channels of communication and reporting unsafe conditions. And then coaching. And again, that comes down to the training aspect. The reason communication has 2 stars with it is this is the area, the communication piece, where all of our checklists reside. And I said, putting a checklist in someone's hands isn't going to fix the problem. Out of all the things we've talked about so far, we're just now getting into the tools that frontline workers not should use, they must use to maintain reliability. And these are checklists, critical, normal, and emergency checklists. A do list is a little different than a checklist. Checklist is something you actually do, and then you check to make sure it's done. A do list is the way we configure complex equipment, the way you configure laser microscopes, the way we configure our interventional MRI machine, the way we configure equipment in anesthesia. You have a do list. Flow check are the things we use in emergencies when we can't be heads down looking at a checklist. So the first couple emergency procedures we commit to memory. We call those flow checks. Everyone here probably has a flow check for seeing a patient. Mine is always, hi, how are you doing? What's your name? What's your birth date? Do you have any allergies? Who is your surgeon? What side are we operating on today? This sort of thing. It's kind of a flow check we do. I really don't need a checklist for it. It's the 5 things I say on every patient. Verbal readback is critical, and I challenge everyone, go to, there's a great website called ATC, I think it's atclive.com or .net. ATC Live is the website, and you can listen to almost any airport in your area or throughout the nation and listen to the way they communicate in the verbal readback. I can pretty much guarantee you won't go more than 5 minutes without hearing someone correct it on the radio. They'll say, November 7333 Alpha, take off runway 13, and they'll come back and say, Roger, take off runway 31, 733 Alpha, and they'll come back and correct them and say, negative 733 Alpha, take off runway 13, and they will correct them. This happens routinely. It's a routine part of making our aviation safe, but we just don't see it even with the most complex of instructions from a doctor to a nurse, from a nurse to another nurse, from a tech to a tech, this sort of thing. These should all require verbal readback, and I know we certainly don't see enough of it. It's a requirement in our operating rooms during certain parts of procedures. Structured debriefs and briefs. We're getting better at this. And we have an orthopedic surgeon now that has really, I thought again, we've been trying to drive this in our organization for years, and we've had an orthopedic surgeon that has been able to get uptake, and she has the entire surgical team performing the, in my estimation, fantastic procedural briefs at the beginning of each and every day, going over the panel of cases, the specifics for each case, where the trouble spots might be, how we have to make it more efficient, and then at the end of the day, having a debrief, what went right, what went wrong, what has to be fixed so we can do this safely tomorrow the same way we did it today. All of this is becoming a routine part of our organization here. Placarding, again, it's an important communication piece. We probably don't see enough of it in our operating rooms. These are the things that actually put down to paper what we should all be doing as reminders to make sure we're doing it. And another thing very important for communication at the individual level is rapid process improvement data robust process improvement data collection and incident reporting. Incident reporting is a part of every day. It's not something you do only when something goes drastically wrong. Incident reporting is something that should be routine. We have, and as far as near misses, et cetera, we have a near miss reporting system in our OR and among all 3 sites in anesthesia, or even the little stuff. This is something everybody does every day. We contribute to the incident reporting system to make sure that we're tracking and we're improving in the areas that we should be. Some examples of developing reliability in small settings are our liver transplantation team here. We, probably 10 years ago, we were at a small hospital, 225 beds. St. Luke's Hospital was part of Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, and we did our first liver transplant. In about a 5-year period, we went from having done no liver transplants to the largest by volume liver transplant program in the country, with the lowest 1- and 5-year mortality rates and the shortest waiting list for organs in the world. We quickly developed that transplantation team with fantastic reliability and safety, and it was done in a sort of a Blue Angel way, if you will, in that we didn't have a big enough organization to have all the pieces of, say, an airline, an HRO that looks like an airline, but we were able to cross-train each other enough that we had very, very, very high resiliency. So we were able to catch mistakes, know when things were going right, know when things were going wrong, and put the various stops in that even if somebody made an error, if there was an error or something was missed, we were able to trap it before it ever reached the patient. And we had great, great success with a small model. At one point, there was 4 anesthesiologists and 4 surgeons on that team, and a number of techs, and each one of us was doing 1% of the liver transplants in the country that year. Our group was doing about 4% of the liver transplants. Each one of us was performing about 1%. So we actually achieved reliability and safety through developing high expertise and cross-training. It's a strategy that you can use in a small setting. It doesn't always work, requires a tremendous amount of energy and leadership, but it's one way to do it. If you'll remember the picture of the conference table from earlier in the talk, the way we did it in neurosurgery with IMRI was almost the exact opposite. We had to come up with a system that we didn't have any layers between no incident and a fatal incident. In other words, one piece of metal, one clip left on the chest of somebody and the magnet comes in, it's going to go through somebody. So we actually had to come up with a system that was structurally highly reliable, and we actually looked at the airline industry and looked at the way they track tools and instruments and everything that goes into maintaining jet engines. There's a way they operate in a jet shop or a ejection seat shop or in a clean room that builds satellites where they keep track of every screw, every tool, et cetera, and we actually use those techniques for our IMRIS system. And now when people open up an IMRIS system, they usually take our book, we have it online now in PDF form, and see what checklists and things are in there to accomplish that. So 2 different strategies for achieving reliability, even among an institution that maybe hasn't even achieved HRO status yet, if you will. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Again, I mentioned our anesthesia near-miss database, and now we're really trying to see where we've made great strides in the operating room and expanding those to every process. And our frontline workers now in the OR are really getting a handle, becoming very skilled and very knowledgeable and actually very assertive in knowing what their role is in making sure we do things safely. I can tell you our entire hospital system recently has rolled out something called the Commitment to Safety, and I think it's really interesting. This I didn't even know it was coming down the line from my vantage point in the OR, and I got an email one day saying, your group is going to go through some Commitment to Safety training, and they want everyone in an entire Mayo organization to learn 5 safe behaviors, a fairness or fair and just culture style paradigm, as well as what they call the team engagement model. Really, really interesting work to make sure that everybody on the front lines does certain things and is engaged in their real job, that the organization understands that the real job of the frontline worker is to engage in teams, have a fair way of distributing work and distributing effort and labor, and as well as conflict resolution, as well as other behaviors. Here are the 5 safe behaviors, and I'll go over them. I think they're interesting. I'm sure that someone has copyrighted this. I know we did this in cooperation with Pascal Metrics, so this may be copyrighted by Pascal Metrics. But the 5 safe behaviors are pay attention to detail, communicate clearly, hand off effectively, support each other, and have a questioning and receptive attitude. These are just 5 behaviors they want every single person to know by heart and to try to add to their everyday work. And I think it's a really interesting program. It has recently rolled out. We're rolling out not only to the main Mayo sites, Rochester, Scottsdale, and Jacksonville, but also to our health systems, which is the system of many hospitals that Mayo interacts with. These are also the 5 behaviors I believe our rugby coach told us to do: hand off effectively and communicate clearly and pay attention to detail. But again, I think they're basic, but it really says something about what your organization when you define what they want everyone to be doing every day in every situation. I might mention from a safety standpoint, to tell someone to pay attention to detail doesn't help much, because it's often the setting they're in which determines how much attention they can pay at any one time, or whether they're exhausted. But I think what they're talking about in this first bullet is actually mindfulness. There's certain parts of our job when you're looking at someone's name band, when you're pulling a drug, etc., that you should be mindful of what you're doing, and that's when you have to sort of get the squeegee your frontal lobe off and say, okay, this is the part I really have to pay attention and be mindful for. So strictly speaking, I've heard many safety experts in industrial safety say telling people to pay attention doesn't help, but having them be mindful at certain points of their job is extremely important. This is some of the debriefing data. Again, one of our surgeons just, this is probably a year ago, but got almost 100% of the cases over a month's time to be briefed and debriefed effectively. And now it's just become part of every day. And I think most of our surgeons here feel that if they're not briefing and debriefing at the beginning and ending of the day, they're not providing good care. It's become something that now, and it's beautifully done, and that if it's missing, then there's something missing from the day. So it's just become part of the way we operate. I think it's fabulous. It hasn't rolled out to every surgical team, but I'd say most of them. This will be the last slide, and really the question is where to start with reliability. Many of you, I'm sure, as safety leaders, you're already there. You already have some great projects going, some great successes, but how do you make it bigger, and how do you engage everyone? And many times it starts with yourself or with the leaders that you're dealing with and making sure they're committed. When I say that, when you decide to go high reliability, because it has been done well in so few settings in medicine overall, that when you're saying you want to become highly reliable, you're really competing with the top people in the whole world. Not competing with, but you're on a journey with. And so I really think that's a great thing, but you have to make sure you're committed and that you're willing to put the energy to reach the goal of zero harm, and that everything is done a certain way each and every time, no matter what, day, night, weekends, Sundays, holidays, for every single patient. And when you do that, it's so satisfying to know that you may go, even though you're a small hospital or a mid-sized hospital, you may be the best in the world at it. if you can make it 0, you will be the best in the world with it. And that's a fundamental way of thinking and motivating your people, knowing, when we do this, we're as good as anybody in the whole world. Reach out to real experts, not fake safety experts, and these are people that are doing it. And often you can just, if you're interested in an article they've written or something they've done at their hospital, call them up, find out how it's going, find out if they're still doing it, and not solely rely on people from outside your organization telling you how to do it. Many times in real HROs, the systems are actually developed from within. The Joint Commission is now very involved in this. I've heard Mark Chasen speak this year several times on reliability, been to the Joint Commission High Reliability website. I think it's called the High Reliability Resource Center, and it's a tremendously valuable site for looking at some basic papers. There's a lot of writing, there's a lot of the basic papers on reliability in medicine there, and I think it's a great place to start. They actually have a targeted solutions tool set that if you don't know where to start, they can start you off with robust process improvement tools and hand hygiene, handoff communications for on-site surgery, etc. And I believe that's in the subcategory of their Center for Transforming Healthcare. But I think I've been asked many times, where should I start? I think that's a great place to start. And again, if they're interested in it and it's a big part of the world of the Joint Commission, I think it's worth listening to. I think the way they're approaching it is really, really great. Tom Krause has a wonderful book called Leading with Safety, and I think that is a great place to start as well. Very basic, very good science. He's a behavioral scientist that was with Paul O'Neill at International Paper and at Alcoa when he made the transformational change in the system for worker safety. Work with your best teams on doing this. Don't start with your worst teams and try to bring them up. Work with your best teams and try to make them better and learn something from the process. I have this picture on the right. That's actually my son from about a month and a half ago now, who was life flighted off of a mountain in Arizona at about 10,000 feet. He had been impaled by a fiberglass object while skiing and was bleeding badly from a chest wound, so bad there was no time to get him to the bottom of the hill. They called a helicopter in and took him out. But I had to see my son go away in a helicopter. He's only 15 without me because the helicopter can't hold that much weight at that high altitude. So he was completely in the hands of the medical system at that point. I knew that the next time I saw him, this was late on a Sunday, and I knew that the next time I saw him, he will have already been operated on by a surgeon I don't know in a hospital that I've never been to, and I didn't even know where it was or how close it was at the time. And the situation would have already started and ended, and I would be coming in at the end with absolutely no way of caring for him or helping tease the system along or make it better or make sure mistakes weren't made. And when I finally got to the pretty small hospital, but very high quality, went in, beautiful trauma setting, fantastic surgeon. Then he was taken to the operating room. Nurse anesthetist was taking care of him. The surgeon had already completed his exploration and suturing up the chest wound on his back. And fortunately didn't hit the liver or the lung, so we were all good there. But again, it was a small hospital. It couldn't have been higher quality. I was so proud of the people. I told everybody. I was so impressed, and I've written them a letter since, so impressed with the care they took of my son because I was so scared when it first started. And this is, I think, what we have to think about when we go to work every day. How can we make this experience for every patient we ever see for the rest of our time? And I'm going to end it and take some questions here. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you so much, Curry. You are awesome. And boy, finishing it with that touch of taking care of someone, that everyone we take care of has to be, we have to think of them as our family, is so important. I'm at the airport. I'm going to keep my comments very short, but just awesome job, Curry. And we're going to ask each of our reactor panelists to comment before we open up for questions on the right panel. And I'll ask Frank Guilleteau to take us through the polling after we go around our panelists. And our first panelist is Hillary Schmidt. Hillary has her doctorate in educational psychology. She is one of the global leaders in continuing education. She's working very closely with us on our Care University program, our Clinton Global Initiative. And Hillary, you have really pioneered some great work in helping us understand moving to new behaviors, and would like to have you kind of react to Dr. Bechtel's presentation and how we can really take small environments and really have an enormous impact.
Thanks for the introduction, and mostly thank you to Perry for that outstanding presentation, really crystallizing what it takes to, and all the complexities, but what it takes to create a high reliability organization. And as an expert in educational psychology and cognitive psychology, when I listen to this, all of the recommendations, and the goal to train to excellence, that really requires excellent training. You're asking, I listen to all of the kinds of the behaviors, the new behaviors that are being asked of all of the members of the healthcare team, and they're not behaviors, they're not skills, they're not competencies that you see typically on the undergraduate training schedule or on the curriculums. There are things that people are being asked to learn new habits. And so, how old habits die hard. New habits require really excellent training. And you talked about the need for frequent training and routine training. And I just would like to suggest that not all training, even when it's frequent or routine, is created equal, and really encourage people to think about the kinds of techniques and strategies that can accelerate learning of new skills and new habits. When education there's a whole new science of learning emerging that shows that certain ways of packaging information, of training, can actually accelerate the learning process and help people acquire new behaviors, new skills. So I think in this context, it's the power of practice and feedback that are frequently missing from a lot of the training that exists out there. So I would like to ask Dr. Bechtel maybe just to share, and again, just a little bit more about his experience with the kind of, the value of practice, feedback, and role models in achieving the goals that you've set out for the audience today.
Sure. I think if there's one special ingredient that we see in nearly every industrial safety site and also in high reliability organizations. And I've been to several of the industries as a guest of Tom Krause, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Amtrak, utility industry and the electrical industry. And in almost all of those, there's a training ritual that they do almost weekly that is very, very important to them. And the companies have they realize that this is an investment in their people that actually has a huge payoff in the end. It's in the training environments are where things you can set up what you want the rituals to be. It's kind of hard in an active on-the-job training environment to try new things. You have to be in a very safe situation. You can't try anything that new, and it tends to be very incremental and very slow-moving. In a training environment, you can try a new thing that eventually becomes a ritual. Our briefing and debriefing sort of came along. We kind of teased that along, and it took a while. We never really trained to it except for a couple of Monday mornings, and now it has become a ritual. Now, once something becomes a ritual, that's fantastic, because once it's there, then it seems odd when it's not there. And that's really what training helps accomplish from that standpoint, from the routine and habitual. As far as other areas, I really think that training is critically important for developing your first and second order managers and determining in your frontline workers who are going to be the next managers, because it again allows them to experiment and make their mistakes in leadership. Everyone has run a training program. I certainly have, where it just didn't come off right. Either the way I prepared for it or the way I ran the organization or had people get in groups, it failed. and it just came off being, half-baked. And we've probably all had those experiences, but you learn from it and you move on, and you really get to have a little more bravery or a little more confidence on the flip side of it to do that. Let's say it works out beautifully, you know that you can exert yourself well as a leader when it comes to that. It also allows the staff to interact with the physicians and with the people at higher hierarchies and lower in a much more safe atmosphere, and they really get to know each other a little better, get to work at each other, because you might be in an assertiveness training scenario that you really do have to be assertive with a surgeon. It's great to do that first in a safer environment. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, great, Perry. Thank you so much. And we had such an amazing experience thanks to you, flying with the Blue Angels and flying in the Fat Albert airplane and watching things. One of the most magnificent things that we saw was the peer-to-peer training, and the fact that the teams at the Blue Angels turn over, the pilots turn over very rapidly, as do the maintenance staff, and that they have no trainers. They train each other, so it's peer-to-peer. I'd like to have you comment on that, and then go to Matt Listiak and then Colin Gabriel, who actually were our cameramen, but also editors and producers of our last film, which really featured you all at the Blue Angels. So could you comment on peer-to-peer training in these environments, and then we'll have Matt and Colin comment, so I can mute.
We'll do, Chuck. The Blue Angels is a very unique training environment. There's actually an entire 2-hour, I think, special on. It's called Making the Team. It's a great special on how training works at the Blues. And what I want to, I'll comment on the training. It's the only way we can turn the team over every 2 years is by having intense focus and training at each of the levels and together. We do that in a unique, quiet environment out in El Centro, California, where we go for 3 months a year. It's almost like a monastery. We go there, spend probably 16 hours a day on the field at El Centro working, going home to sleep, and we take about 1 day off every other week. So it's a pretty intense training environment. But the impact that good training has on frontline people, I think, is perfectly described in you have a little clip that you sent me. I think it's on the TMIT website somewhere, and Matt may be able to speak to it, where you interview one of our workers. He's a fellow who he's a mechanic, I believe, an engine mechanic, and he says not only has being at the Blue Angels made him a better team player, it's made him a better person, and it's improved him in so many ways he can't even describe it.
Perry, his name was Nate, and he's very, very memorable. And when the engines were spooled up and the Blue Angels were taking off, he got tears in his eyes, and he said, "That's the sound of liberty." Yeah, and I get tears in my eyes when I think of Nate, because I think of the way he described his experience at the Blues. And I think it's not only at the Blues, but any tight-knit organization where you're doing meaningful work, your decisions are consequential, and you've been trained to do your job. This is a guy that turns wrenches, fixes engines, and washes the airplane. He's not up there flying every day. He doesn't have newspaper people tracking him down for interviews and people chasing him for autographs. Actually, he does probably now. But he's a guy that he has had an experience of being a highly trained person, and takes great personal satisfaction in that. And every HRO you go to, the airline industry, utilities, etc., when you see great organizations, this is the way their frontline people act and work, and it's a great thing to see, and we really have to encourage that in medicine. Great, thank you. Matt and Colin, I don't know whether they're on right now, but we'd like to have you comment having shot the Angels, and if not, we'll go to Frank.
Chuck, this is Hillary. Could I ask a quick question?
Please do.
Yeah, you talked about a very intensive training experience, 3 months in high intensity, and sort of in the real practical world of medicine. Do you think that it's important to have equivalent, really high fidelity simulations in place to train people, or do you think that low fidelity simulation is likely to be just as effective?
Well, I'll tell you, I really think low fidelity simulation, or sometimes what we call in situ simulation, where you take your own operating room, it's a regular operating room, and run scenarios in it for training, is extremely valuable. And I think a lot of, we're fortunate at Mayo. Our site has a 10,000 square foot, several $1 million high fidelity patient simulators. Every camera and gizmo you could think of is there, and it's fantastic. And we do a lot of developmental work there on technology. They also have that in Rochester. But if you're in an organization that doesn't have that resource, I think you can get 99.9% of the same value out of low fidelity training or procedural training and interaction training in your own environment. And sometimes it has to take place before or after hours, before the day starts or after, just so you have an empty operating room or an empty environment. But I think it's very valuable, and I really don't think you need high-fidelity simulation with artificial patients and this sort of thing to get your greatest bang for the buck from a reliability standpoint, because what we're talking about is embedding, root behaviors that people are going to do this each and every time, and when it doesn't work out, they know that they're in an abnormal state or in a failure mode, and what's the tree for the failure mode? Where do they go from here? And you embed those behaviors not by high-fidelity simulation. That's really where you can develop expertise in things. But those behaviors can be embedded in procedural trainers or much lower fidelity settings, like we do in aviation. Your first experience at Whiting Field, I went through Navy primary flight training, and your first experience is a blind cockpit check. They put you in something that looks like what a 4-year-old would climb in at the playground. It's an airplane cockpit, and they'll tell you to touch the altimeter, touch the landing gear circuit breaker, touch landing gear handle, reach around, and they'll make you touch the 1,200 things that are in a cockpit so you know them blind. And now it's a very valuable training with about probably a $10 device. So I think you're going to get great bang for the buck. And every hospital, don't feel like not having a simulator is an impediment to becoming great. That's that's what this whole talk is about, that every hospital, just like the one my son was in, can be a great hospital and very reliable.
So Perry, the low-frequency, high-impact event is when we blow an engine and have an emergency, and it's not unlike what happens to our family member. We hope it would never happen to us. Share with the group what happened to the Oracle team plane. We interviewed your friend Sean, who's a world-class aerobatic pilot, who's an honorary team member of the Blue Angels and on the Team Oracle. And his mechanic is flying the airplane back, and tell the story and tell how just applying these principles probably saved his life and saved the airplane.
Sure. I actually just saw Sean Tucker, who's the pilot for Blue Angel Oracle, and Brian, his crewmate. Sean's had to jump out of a couple of airplanes, but they were coming back from one of the shows, and Brian, his crewmate, was flying. This is a single-seat, very high-performance, highly modified biplane, and he blew an engine. Oil went over the windscreen, and he was going to eject, and just happened to have a wingman, and went down. His wingman saw a road and actually landed him on a road. And I have some pictures, and I also have some video of actually Sean losing a propeller once with a person in the front of the airplane. And in each of these settings, and you can talk to people that fly, we train for engine out. We train all the time. My kids, if I ever lose an engine or if they ever lose an engine when they're flying, they can literally do it in their sleep. They know exactly the procedures that happen that are going to have to occur in order for them to land safely and control the airplane and not hit anything. And I try to get this across to our residents that when the crisis happens, or when we see the crises happen here, and you see a physician or a nurse or a tech handle things just perfectly and quietly and calmly, people think they're supermen. Oh my gosh, you should have seen it. The disaster happened, and they just handled everything perfectly and it all worked out. And actually, we don't become supermen. What happens is we kind of retract back into our training and how we were trained. You don't all of a sudden become a super anesthesiologist when the heart stops on the table. You revert back to your training. You handle everything. You do everything like you trained, and things work out. And that's how we put safety in our favor. that's what happened in both of those incidents with losing the propeller and losing the engine, and really how industries handle emergencies. They really rely on people on the ground using their basic training to make consequential decisions to avert disaster.
Chuck, Matt and Colin are here, and sorry we missed earlier, but we just wanted to thank Perry again for this tremendous talk, and thank him for the opportunity that he provided us to allow the Blue Angels to be in Surfing the Tsunami, and in thinking about this role of teamwork. We were talking to the boss of the Blue Angels, who was just a tremendous leader and, of course, incredibly humble. And he told us about what he considered to be the 3 pillars of teamwork, and these really stuck with me from the Blue Angels experience. He talked about sacrifice, communication, and trust, and the biggest of that being trust. And what he'll actually do is, he flies in the shows, and before the show, he has the mechanics and the techs. They check out the airplane completely. He doesn't check out anything himself, which is completely unusual for a pilot. And as soon as they shake his hand and say the plane is ready, he gets in the plane to do these incredibly dangerous maneuvers that, of course, look beautiful and easy when you're on the ground, but they're just incredibly dangerous, high-risk situation. And it's 100% trust for him. He knows that the plane is ready to go, and he just trusts his team to do it. And that level of trust is really, it makes me think of what we do for our patients. In a lot of ways, the patients are stepping into these airplanes to be put through very dangerous procedures and maneuvers, and they trust that the team is there to keep them safe. And so building that team is obviously what's been a critical success factor for the Blue Angels. And so, we tried to document a little bit of that in Surfing the Healthcare Tsunami, which you guys can all watch on Safety Leaders. It's streaming there from the site. But, any other comments that you could make, Perry, on building that team? Obviously, ritual is incredibly important, and your presentation today is focused a lot on that. But that was a big takeaway for me, was that trust in the team that's just inherent in what you guys do with the Blue Angels, which is sometimes tricky to get in a healthcare setting.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Blues it's a unique experience for everybody that's ever on the team, and it's very difficult to replicate. We've had people go from the Blue Angels to the astronaut corps at NASA, and I remember getting a call a couple of years ago. I talked to a very close friend of mine who was an astronaut, and he said, Perry, you know what? It's the astronaut corps here. It's nothing like the Blues. It's just not. It's not as tight knit, et cetera. It's such a unique situation. And again, those three pieces of teamwork, sacrifice, communication, and trust, are incredibly important to us at the Blues and in all of aviation, because when you're a mechanic or your AMP, you have to trust that he's looked after your airplane, even though you're the one pre-flighting it. The way you develop trust in an operating room, and I've mentioned this 2 or 3 times in the talk, is frontline workers have to have the training to know their equipment and to know what they're doing well enough that they are allowed the latitude and the flexibility in their jobs to make decisions of consequence. And dumbing down our systems and oversimplifying so that no one can make a decision of consequence unless you're a safety leader, unless we used to have a system here. In order to add a case on at the end of the day or something, they had to call the chief of surgery or some ridiculous thing like that. It was a mess. Okay, why can't the person in the front office who's looking at the board just say, yeah, add the case, or no, you can't add the case? Well, people have to stay late, and that costs overtime. When you get into that kind of thing where, people at the front line can only make small decisions, but all the big decisions, they're going to be made way up the chain. That is not the way you develop trust. You don't develop your organization, and you don't develop your people that way. And you'll never develop reliability that way, because nothing's going to go back up the chain ever, and it develops a lot of mistrust among the groups. You have to be able to have a system that your frontline workers can make a decision. again, one-size-fits-all things, we're going to do a timeout for everything. Okay, every time a patient has an IV, do we have to have a timeout? Every time a patient has, we're going to put a pulse ox on the finger. Okay, let's have a timeout. Get the pulse ox. Okay, we're going to put it on the left finger. Does everybody agree this is the left finger? You know, if you have to really have some balance of practicality, reality, and operational imperative to be able to drive safety, because every time you do something unnecessary, like do a timeout, every time you're going to put a pulse ox on somebody's finger, or every time you're going to, okay, blood pressure is going to go on the left arm, you know, because we might squeeze somebody's left arm too much or something. You know, if you're going to have a timeout procedure, a ridiculous procedure that's unnecessary in everyone's eyes, except maybe one person in the group, then you're stealing resources to do really important work. And so it's important from the trust standpoint, let people at the front lines make consequential decisions and back them up if they make a mistake. If they make a mistake, here's how it happened. I understand how you made that mistake. Here's how we can learn from it. But you have to have the bravery an organization does. And even if you're training in small groups, you have to have the bravery to let the people make some calls. And I think that's a really important part of our trust at the Blues. We let those guys make the hard call and make some mistakes.
Perry, Chuck, back on. For some reason the system got me off. But I'd like to have Frank move us forward to go through an important poll that our test bed audience really would like to have some answers to, and then we'll swing back to more comments. And we want to remind people after we do the poll, the question that the panel in the lower right-hand corner, you can ask Dr. Becton questions, and we'll loop back to the panel. So Frank, could you take over advancing the slides and take us through the questions?
Comment regarding the presentation. Obviously, Dr. Peck, that was a very interesting. As an engineer, I certainly appreciate the whole aspect of making systems more resilient. I just wanted, before I kind of forgot my question, kind of get your perspective. I mean, there's obviously a whole systems re-engineering process that can take place. But, you know, from an outsider looking in, when we think of Blue Angels, we always think of, or I think about the right stuff, you know, all these guys that have gone through a highly selective process, and then they're becoming these great performers. How do you handle, I mean, in an environment like healthcare, not that we have a lot of you know, challenges in terms of filling, you know, the actual staffing level, and sometimes we don't always get to choose our teammates. So how do you bring together that challenge of really expecting high performance, but not necessarily being able to have the selection process that maybe a high-performing organization would have?
Sure. Obviously, we do have a unique selection process, but it's not what you think, believe it or not. And our boss McWhorter, when he was interviewed for the Discovery Channel work, said we can make any soldier, sailor, or Marine, any sailor or Marine a Blue Angel, and that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. There's a selection process, but it's not. These aren't hot shots that we get. I mean, they're great people, but we don't look for people that have big egos and this sort of thing. We actually look for people that aren't too cool for school, because they've never been a Blue Angel. They don't know what it involves. There's a lot of training, and they have to be very humble about what their role is in the organization. Everyone's role, my role as a flight surgeon at the Blues, much different than my role in the squadron, in a fleet squadron with the Marine Corps. And I was with the Harrier Training Squadron, a very high-risk, very high-consequence squadron, and my role at the Blues was safety and operations. It was completely different. But so I had to totally retrain in practically every aspect of my knowledge base, and so does every pilot. They've never done what they're about to do, but we have a long history of flying a certain way, and we really select pilots that are great people. And the piloting part, every naval aviator can do what they do, but it's, you know, you don't have that in healthcare. Maybe you have to take some team members and train them up. But the most important thing is to work together and make them part of the team. And there's a process for that.
Right. Thank you. And as Chuck mentioned, we're going to go to our polling section. And this ties back for those of you that were on the webinar last month in March, we had Joseph Perez that shared with us some of these emerging issues, which are usually a little bit hidden because they're in an outpatient or procedural environment where the system, and we've been talking about systems and bringing together teams, may not have rolled out as much of a systematic approach to solving infection prevention challenges. So I'm going to just address a couple of key takeaways from that discussion, and we'll have 9 questions for the polling, and you should be in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You should have those questions coming up as I read through them. But again, this is to set up this issue of outbreaks in the outpatient or procedural environment, especially as we start pushing out a lot of the care into those settings. We're finding increasingly that we don't have the resilient systems that we've been talking about, and we may have implemented them in a inpatient environment, and many a times we just have not followed through in establishing those into those settings. So these were some of the slides, and I really recommend for you, we still have the webinar up, and you can certainly go and look at it and see it's about about 45-minute presentation. But it really drives home a number of things, and again, we were talking about a lack of systematic surveillance for the detection of the process, or just policies. We're talking about checklists and the likes. These are all issues that are increasingly problematic. So one of the key elements that we want to address as you go through the process of answering these questions is really in the context of the key takeaway. We know that this is a growing issue. We know that not only related to injection issues or we talked about just infections being transmitted, but also we're seeing this in the imaging procedure suites where we're seeing from patients being imaged, sometimes there being a risk of infection. And this issue of uniform standard of care, of making sure that as we expand our network to outpatient facilities, how do we make sure that we also implement the right processes? And then finally, one of the toxic tail referring to if you acquire a facility that's been doing things a certain way, you're really putting yourself at risk. So how do you mitigate those risks? So now going to the questions. The first questions related to that is, if infection prevention, and that would be the department, has signed off on the effectiveness of and the science of a new best practice or technology, I do not need more science to make a decision. So this question revolves around the fact is whether or not you have a need to get more research around an area, even though infection prevention has addressed it in the context of doing the research and providing it to you.
And Frank, I'll jump here. Because of the noise in the background, I'll have Frank read the questions. But basically, what we're saying here is if there's adequate science and basic science and preventative science on the fact that a new process kills bugs or prevents bacteria, would you, up at the level where most of our audience are, at the patient safety officer level, need to have more of the basic science or fundamental infection-related science, or is that satisfactory? And we tend to feel like once infection control signs off and the science is solidly there, we don't need to keep overemphasizing the science when we go to the C-suite.
Okay, so I think we can go to the next question here. And so the next question being, before I acquired or implement a new practice or solution, I need to quantify the system's risk and workflow impact of the change for our leaders. And we've had obviously a good discussion about putting in place the right environment, the right processes. So the question points directly to that. Do I need to quantify that with our leaders and my team? All right. Next questions would be around, I need a business case approach, including direct and indirect costs, to get approval from multiple decision makers. Again, this is about cross-functional issues and having a team-based decision and having really the mechanism to demonstrate the impact as well as the direct and indirect costs. So do I need that in order for me to get approval from multiple decision makers? Next question. Case studies from other organizations like mine are important to the adoption of a practice, a product, or service innovation. So we're looking at my peers in other organizations and their case studies demonstrating that they've been able to implement a practice, a product, or service of innovation. How important is that to me? 10 being very important and 1 being not important at all. Next question. Key opinion leaders who validate the value of our clinical, operational, and financial systems are important. So whoever is in the field in the area that we're reviewing, be it a practice, a product, or a service innovation, looking at those key opinion leaders, how important is that to me to make the decision, or to our systems in order to make a decision? The next question is a peer community to identify new solutions and implementation approach is of great value. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Next question. We rely more heavily on opinions of our peers than scientific articles or key opinion leaders to inform us about innovations. So what is your source and who do you count on most in order to get information about innovations? So 10 being I rely very heavily and 1 being I rely very little on my peers. And then final question, a total cost of ownership approach to compare choices must include comparing non-financial risk of converting to a new innovation. So this really points to the traditional view of total cost of ownership being the initial investment and the supplies that are related to a specific technology. In this case, we're asking whether or not there are other factors that are not directly related to the financial expenditures, but those are important and we must include them when we shift to a new innovation. And 10 being very high, we must include those, and 1 being we don't need to include those. Okay, well, thank you for your contribution to the poll.
Well, Frank, thank you. We've got a few minutes, and I wanted to make sure that everybody got a chance to speak, and we'll have Jennifer close us. But beforehand, when my phone dropped off, I'm not sure that Colin got a chance to kind of comment on his observations of shooting and flying and being with the Blue Angels. And Colin, do you have a question for Perry or a comment of what you observed?
Yeah, actually I do. Perry, thanks again for the great presentation. I know everybody's been saying it, but it's always nice to be reminded of how amazing the system we got to witness out there with the Blue Angels. And one thing that struck me, especially about what you were during your talk, was the humility aspect. During the Fat Albert session that we were filming, we noticed that immediately after they came back, they did the no-fall debrief. And I think one of the first ones to talk about it was the lead pilot, and he just kind of quoted something that that he had done. It was very minor, but it sort of incited the rest of the group to kind of have this very circular approach to like highlighting just things that they could improve on next time. It was not even a question of whether they had made a mistake or not. It was, I can do this better. I should have done this. I should have done that. And I know that humility also extends out to the Mayo Clinic as well. I've witnessed it as well when we were out there and interviewed Dr. Rupp, the CEO, and he was saying how they went to the front line for all of the solutions to some of the things that were going on at the Mayo Clinic at the time. And I think it was something like 54 of the the solutions that were implemented, 53 of them came from the frontline workers, and it's that level of humility that seems to be part of the culture that I would just love it if you could comment towards, because I found it to be very inspiring to kind of know that, I know doctors have lives in their hands every day, and we take that very seriously when we're trying to compose the pieces that we put on the internet and things like that for education. But to have a level of humility along with it doesn't seem to be the easiest thing to do when you've got to constantly be putting your emotions aside to help the patient. And I just loved it at the Mayo Clinic how Dr. Rupp and all the people on the front line reflect, even the environmental services folks were talking about how if they were cleaning rooms properly, they're saving lives as well. I would love it if you could talk to that point as well about process and performance improvement there.
Sure. Well, here obviously we have great support from our administration for frontline workers. It's the way this place pretty much operates, and we are given the ability to bring ideas forward and change the way we're working. As far as the blues go, really, our debriefs are critically important for a 45-minute show. You didn't sit on a jet debrief, but on the jet debriefs, it takes about an hour-and-a-half process, perhaps, where every single maneuver is gone through in detail with video, et cetera. And every person on the team, each of the pilots, will say, what they did wrong. There's a general and safe portion of the debrief, and then they go through each maneuver and what was going through their mind and what kind of wasn't going right. And they really do, and everybody on the team holds themselves accountable to the other team members on a daily basis. We bring it up every day, and it helps really diffuse and advance the process. But we go through excruciatingly painful debriefs when things go horribly wrong, and major errors, or somebody might hit one another. You don't know this, but a lot of times, we'll land and there'll be blue paint where the yellow paint was because they tapped one another during the flight, and this is very dangerous. And the debriefs that go on during this type of activity are very serious, and we get to the bottom of it. What went on here? And this goes on a daily basis, every single flight, 300 flights a year. I do have a little housekeeping note that was reminded on the quick Q&A portion, and that's in my slide templates, some of the references and my Mayo logo did not show up on each and every slide. The characteristics of the HROs, that is cited to Wyke and Sutcliffe and their groundbreaking work on HROs back, I believe it was in the 1980s or perhaps 1990s. But they did great work, and it's constantly cited in every article. The Joint Commission provided data for the medical errors, the NTSB got the data on the airline accidents, and Mayo Clinic commitment to safety is copyrighted to Mayo Clinic and Pascal Metrics. Just a little bit of housekeeping from the slide standpoint. But thanks for reminding me about us, Wyke and Sutcliffe.
Well, Perry, you've been absolutely terrific, and I want to leave a little bit of time for maybe just one quick comment from Hillary, Frank, Matt, Colin, very short, and then we'll turn things over to Jenny. And Jenny, you can make a comment and then close us because you haven't had a chance to speak. So, but Perry, awesome, just absolutely terrific. You really made it practical. Frequently, HROs tend to start to sound like a scholarly sort of, it only happens on aircraft carriers, and you brought it really home to what we can do and just about anything we do, and we're so grateful, and we're also so grateful for your leadership and coming up to me after a speech at Mayo and offering to help with the Blue Angels. They wouldn't have been in the film, and we wouldn't have had this great experience had it not been for your humble servant leadership all the way through. So we're so grateful. But I'd like to give start with Hillary, Frank, Matt, Colin, and then go to Jenny, and then we'll close. We'd like the speakers to stay on right after so we can do a quick process improvement loop. So Hillary?
Yes, thank you. I remember just reminding everyone, I come from the lens as an expert in instructional design and what it takes for a learner at the front line, thinking about what does it really take them to move from where they are today to assuming the roles that Dr. Bechtel has described as so critical in acquiring these new habits and competencies. And I just really want to really underscore, from my vantage point, the critical importance of, again, if you're training to excellence, you need really excellent training. And to think about reaching out to the experts in your fields, maybe in the CME world, maybe at instructional designers at universities and so forth, to really help design training and integrate it into the process of care that can really accelerate learning. Because new habits and new skills take a lot of practice to learn.
Thank you, Hillary, and we look forward to the great work we're going to be doing with you in Care University. Frank.
Well, I would like to thank Dr. Bechtold for demystifying, in some respect, this notion of high reliability organization is not just limited to the guys that are flying up there in the sky, and just making it very practical, and really giving some of our listeners an opportunity to look internally and potentially try this out at a smaller scale. You don't have to transform the organization to get there. You may want to just start in your department and within your sphere of influence. So thank you for giving us that initial blueprint.
Matt and Colin?
Yeah, I just wanted to thanks again, Perry, and reiterate the thing on training. It's so critical, and thanks, Perry, for bringing up the point that Boss made, where you can turn any sailor or Marine into a Blue Angel because of that training and that culture. And I think that's of critical importance. So, remember that training, and remember the train-the-trainer kind of aspect, where it's not a top-down approach. It's about building out your team at every level, and they're going to disperse that great knowledge and continue to make your organizations better.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Again, Perry.
Okay. Well,
So
thanks. Oh, sorry.
Well, so we want to, now we're just a minute over, and we'd love to have Jenny Dingman close us, and thank you, Perry, very much. Jenny, your comments, and then close us, please.
Yeah, wow, what an enlightening webinar. Thank you so much, Doctor, for all of your information and insights. I'm just totally thankful for everything I heard today. I did want to make a comment. As passengers, we get on airplanes for the most part, and we just presume that everything's taken care of, and we're going to get destination be safely. It's unfortunate that in healthcare we have the same perceptions, but healthcare we have the same perceptions, but a lot of times things don't work out well. I would very much like to see frontline providers have more training and be glorified a little more. One of my colleagues, Rebecca Martins, came up with a really great program called the Gold Star Reward Program for providers who do excellent work. And I think we have to strive for that perfection, and it is part of our job when we're trying to provide health care for patients and families. I think aviation can teach the lessons to healthcare if healthcare would just listen. And I, again, would like to thank everyone on this call today for being here and for your dedication and your fortitude in keeping patients safe. Dr. Denham, thank you very much for such a great webinar. I'll hand it back to you now.
Okay, well, thank you all. God bless. I hope you have a great day, and we'll keep the speakers on just so we can keep improving what we do to help serve you. Take care. Have a great day.